On a night when the city held its breath, cloaked in silence and shadow, a man the world had forgotten whispered 2 words to a police officer. "Don't talk." Those words, spoken in a voice rough as gravel, were a lifeline she never saw coming. Most people hurry through the concrete canyons of downtown after midnight, their faces lit by the blue glow of their phones, their minds a million miles away. They don't see the real city, the one that comes alive in the darkness. But Silas Washington was not most people. For him, the city was a language. He could read the story in a discarded newspaper skittering across the pavement, in the nervous energy of a shadow that stretched too long under a flickering streetlight. His life on these streets had been a brutal education, stripping him of everything but his senses. It had trained him to feel danger in the air, a subtle shift in barometric pressure that warned of a coming storm. And tonight, a storm was brewing. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken threat. Silas sat huddled under the chipped, faded green awning of a closed-down diner, a relic of a bygone era. He took a slow sip of the cold coffee he'd been nursing for the past 2 hours, the bitter liquid doing little to warm the chill that had settled deep in his bones. He was a master of blending in, of becoming another shadow in a city full of them. That's when his finely tuned senses caught something wrong. Across the street, 2 men stood unnaturally still by a line of parked cars. It wasn't their presence that bothered him, but their posture. It was the tense, coiled stillness of a predator waiting for its prey. Silas leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he peered through the gloom. He'd seen every kind of trouble the city could cook up, but this felt different. This felt methodical. These men weren't killing time. They were waiting for an opportunity. They were hunting. "This is no good," Silas muttered, his breath a small white cloud in the cold air. His blood ran cold as one of the men casually adjusted his thin jacket. For a split second, the streetlight caught the flat black handle of a weapon tucked into his jeans. It wasn't for show. It was seated for a quick, easy draw. This was a blade that was meant to be used. Silas froze, his body screaming at him to yell, to shatter the night's silence with a warning. But he forced the impulse down. He had learned the hard way that noise was a trigger. A shout could start the violence, while silence could buy you time. He held his breath, a silent observer to a crime that hadn't happened yet. Then he saw her. The steady, rhythmic echo of her boots on the pavement announced her arrival before she came into view. A lone patrol officer walking her beat. Officer Kendra Davis was nearing the end of a grueling 10-hour shift. At 34, she wore her uniform with a confidence that came from experience, but tonight, a bone-deep weariness was setting in, dulling the sharp edges of her perception. Her thoughts were already at home, with her cat, Jasper, and the promise of a few hours of quiet before the city demanded her attention once more. Silas's heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. She was on a direct course with the 2 men, walking straight into the crosshairs of a carefully laid trap. Silas shifted his weight, the movement disguised as him adjusting his thin blanket. But his eyes never left the 2 men. He thought of the countless faces that had passed him by over the years, their eyes looking straight through him. That invisibility, once a source of pain and loneliness, had become his greatest strength. He saw the things that comfortable people with homes to go to, were blind to. Tonight, that terrible gift might be the only thing standing between this officer and a brutal end to her shift. Kendra reached her squad car and let out a quiet sigh, the exhaustion of the long night causing her shoulders to slump for just a second. It was a fleeting moment of vulnerability, but in the chess game of the streets, It was a critical mistake. She had no idea she was being watched, studied, and judged as an easy target. A surge of protective adrenaline cut through Silas. He couldn't just sit here. He had to act. He pushed himself up, the plastic bag filled with the day's collection of cans rattling softly at his side. He needed to get closer, but he had to do it without alerting the predators. They had already clocked him. One of them shot him a sideways glance, a silent, dismissive assessment. To them, he was just another piece of the city's scenery. Silas used that perception to his advantage. He let his shoulders hunch, adopted a convincing limp, and began to shuffle towards a large, overflowing trash bin that stood between the officer and the two men. He pretended to rummage through the garbage, his fingers fumbling with discarded wrappers, but his eyes were locked on the reflection in the diner's dirty plate glass window, giving him a perfect, secret view of the entire scene. "Come on, officer. Look around you," he whispered, the prayer lost to the wind. Every nerve in his body felt like a live wire. The city could snatch a life in the blink of an eye. The wrong corner, the wrong second, could be the end of your story. And as Kendra reached for her car door, Silas saw the men's bodies tense. The hunt was about to end. He knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that his silence was no longer enough. The click of Kendra's car door unlocking sounded like a gunshot in the heavy silence. She gripped the handle, and that's when she finally felt it. The cold, prickling sensation on the back of her neck that every cop learns to trust. The feeling of hostile eyes on her. Her training took over. She didn't snap her head around. Instead, she turned it slowly, casually, as if stretching a sore muscle, but her eyes were scanning, absorbing every detail. Something was dangerously wrong. Silas's heart was a frantic drum in his chest. He had mere seconds. He limped a few feet closer, pushing an empty soda can with his foot to create a plausible sound. He looked up, and for the first time that night, his eyes met Kendra's. He poured all the urgency and danger he felt into his gaze, and mouthed two silent, crucial words. "Don't talk." Kendra frowned, the message not immediately registering. Her hand was still on the car door, her mind still halfway home. But then her eyes followed his, flicking across the street to the two men. She saw how they had repositioned themselves, one taking a step off the curb to block any retreat. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. It was an ambush. Her hand dropped from the door, moving to rest near the grip of her sidearm, in a motion that was both casual and deliberate. She wasn't drawing, not yet. She was just letting them know she was ready. All the while, Silas held his position by the trash bin, a silent, unassuming guardian angel she never knew she had. His unexpected presence confused the attackers, buying her another precious second to think. One of the men finally broke the silence, his voice a low, mocking drawl. "You seem a little lost, officer." Kendra's jaw clenched, but her voice was pure ice when she replied, "Not tonight." The second man let out a short, humorless chuckle as he stepped forward. "That's too bad. Looks like you're all alone out here." A fresh wave of fear tried to grip Kendra, but Silas saw it. He gave her another sharp, meaningful look, urging her to act. She understood. With practiced subtlety, her thumb found the transmit button on her shoulder radio. "Unit 14. I have a possible 1054 on Wisconsin, and 18th, requesting backup." Her voice was calm, almost conversational, but her pulse was pounding a frantic rhythm against her eardrums. The sound of her voice on the radio, however quiet, changed the atmosphere. The two men exchanged a look of pure fury. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. It was then that Silas found his voice, a gravelly rumble that seemed to rise from the pavement itself. "Hey," he said, loud enough to startle them. "Leave her alone." "She's working." Kendra was stunned. She never expected him to intervene directly. The man closer to them sneered, his eyes filled with contempt. "Mind your own damn business, old man, unless you want to be the first one to get hurt." But Silas didn't flinch. He took a deliberate step forward, away from the trash bin. His hands may have been trembling, but his voice was as solid as the concrete beneath his feet. "This is my business." The street fell utterly silent, the standoff now declared. This wasn't just a potential mugging anymore. It was a confrontation. The moment hung in the balance, and then one of the men shifted his jacket again, letting the threat of the hidden knife become a promise. The air crackled with unspoken violence. "You've got a big mouth for a bum," the taller attacker snarled at Silas. But Silas held his gaze, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of hardship. "I've seen your kind before," he said, his voice low and steady. "You think you own the darkness, that no one is watching?" He gestured with his head toward Kendra. "Tonight you're wrong." The words struck a nerve. The man's face twisted in rage as he took another menacing step forward. Kendra shifted her stance, her body perfectly balanced, ready to react. "Sir, I need you to take a step back," she commanded, her voice sharp with authority. The man just smirked. "Or what?" he challenged. His partner, the shorter one, made a show of tapping his jacket right where the knife was hidden. The glint of steel was a silent threat. "Let's all keep this friendly, officer," he said, his grin anything but. Kendra's heart hammered against her vest, but her voice didn't waver. "Drop whatever you're holding." "Now." Silas swallowed hard, the dry lump of fear in his throat. He knew how quickly this could spiral. If Kendra drew her weapon too soon, they would rush her. If she waited too long, it would be too late. He clenched his fists in his pockets, the worn fabric of his gloves straining at the seams. The taller man focused his venom on Silas. "Are you going to listen to the nice officer?" he sneered. "Or are you going to force my hand?" Silas looked him dead in the eye. "You think I care what happens to me?" he asked, his voice laced with a raw, hollowed-out pain. "I've been through hells you can't even imagine, but she is not your target tonight." The raw power in his words momentarily stunned the attackers. Kendra glanced at him, surprised. This wasn't bravado. It was the unshakable truth of a man who had stared into the abyss and hadn't blinked. The shorter man recovered first, laughing nervously. "That's big talk for someone digging through garbage for a living." Silas squared his shoulders, a surprising dignity radiating from his thin frame. "Yeah, I dig in the trash," he admitted, his voice ringing with a strange power. "But I still see you. And in your world, being seen means you've already lost." That sentence hit them like a physical blow. It flipped the script, and they were visibly rattled. They were predators who relied on fear and surprise, and Silas had just stripped them of both. Kendra saw her opening. "You are both making a mistake you cannot take back," she said, her voice rising, projecting an authority she didn't entirely feel. "My backup is on its way. Do you really want to gamble on how much time you have left?" As if on cue, the distant wail of a single siren cut through the night. It wasn't close, not yet, but it was real. "You hear that?" Silas pressed, his eyes darting down the street. "That's for you. It's coming for you." Panic flashed in the shorter man's eyes. "Yo, let's go, man!" he hissed, tugging on his partner's sleeve. But the taller one was consumed by a furious pride. He pulled the knife, the blade catching the streetlight. The sight of the steel made Kendra's stomach churn, but her face was a mask of stone. "Put it down!" she barked. The man laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. Or what? You gonna shoot me? What about your little friend here? He's in the way. He gestured with the knife toward Silas. It was true. Silas was directly in the line of fire, a human shield whether he wanted to be or not. Still, he didn't move an inch. He planted his feet, a silent act of defiance. Try me, Kendra challenged, her hand now fully wrapped around the grip of her service weapon. The man's grin faltered. He hadn't expected this much resistance. Not from her, and certainly not from the homeless man. You want to spend the rest of your life in a concrete box? Silas's voice cut through the tension again, sharp and clear. Because you are seconds away from making that choice permanent. The man's knife hand twitched with indecision. His partner was practically dragging him away now. It's not worth it, man. Let's bounce. For a second, it looked like he might listen. But then his anger flared, hotter than his fear, and he raised the gleaming knife high, the streetlights dancing on its deadly edge. The world seemed to shrink to the space between the three of them. Kendra's muscles coiled, ready to draw and fire, but standing between her and the blade was Silas, a steadfast, unlikely guardian. Don't move too fast, Silas whispered to her, his voice a low, calming rumble. Let him burn himself out. She wanted to scream at him to get clear, but she saw the wisdom in his tired eyes. He understood this kind of desperation, this kind of rage. He knew how to survive it. Look at the big hero, the man with the knife mocked, his voice cracking under the strain. Think you can save her? Put the knife on the ground. This is your last warning, Kendra's voice rang out, clear and unwavering. The shorter man pleaded with his friend. We gotta go now. She's not bluffing, but the taller one was trapped in his rage, his eyes darting between Silas and Kendra, his mind racing. Kendra pressed her radio again, her voice now hard and urgent. Unit 14, suspect is armed with a blade. I need immediate assistance. The crackle of the radio seemed to amplify the tension tenfold. Silas took another deliberate step closer to the armed man, never breaking eye contact. You're not ready for what comes next, he said softly. I've been where you are, thinking I had nothing to lose. Trust me, you don't want to carry what happens next for the rest of your life. The man's lips curled back in a snarl. You don't know me. Silas's voice remained steady. I know enough. I know that blade in your hand isn't just steel, it's a life sentence. For the first time, the man's resolve seemed to crack. The knife lowered by a fraction of an inch. Kendra saw it. It's working, she breathed, so low only Silas could hear. Keep him talking. Silas didn't reply, but the tightening of his jaw said everything. The man spat on the ground in frustration. His partner was now frantic. Cops are coming, we have to move! Seizing the moment of hesitation, Silas raised his voice just enough for Kendra to hear clearly. Don't talk. Let me handle them. It was an instruction. He was taking control of the scene, drawing all the focus onto himself. It went against every instinct Kendra had, but she trusted him. You're not stopping me, old man, the attacker screamed, jabbing the air with the knife. Silas closed the distance between them, his face a mask of calm determination. Maybe not, he said, but I'm not moving. So if you want her, you have to go through me. The simple, insane courage of that statement struck the man harder than any physical blow. His grip on the knife trembled. He looked at Silas, at his ragged coat, his weathered face, his calloused hands. And for the first time, he saw not a victim, but a man who had nothing left to fear. He saw the truth in those tired old eyes. The sirens were louder now, no longer a distant wail, but a piercing scream that was rapidly getting closer. The shorter man gave one last desperate tug. They're here. We're done. Let's go. The taller man's shoulders slumped in defeat, his plan in ruins. This isn't over, he growled, taking a step back. Just as relief began to wash over Kendra, the man spun back around, his eyes wild with cornered animal rage. He made one last, desperate move, the knife flashing upwards. Before Kendra could even react, Silas lunged, not away, but towards the danger. He swung his heavy bag of cans in a wide, powerful arc, smashing it into the man's wrist with a sickening thud. The plastic bag split open, cans and glass spilling and rattling across the pavement. The knife clattered to the ground, spinning to a stop just inches from Kendra's boots. "Get on the ground!" Kendra roared, her firearm finally drawn, its black form a stark contrast to the flashing lights that were now flooding the street. Her voice was pure iron, leaving no room for argument. The shorter man collapsed to his knees, hands shooting into the air. The taller one clutched his injured wrist, his face contorted in a mask of pain and hatred. He glared at Silas. "You think you're a hero? You just signed your own death warrant." But Silas, though trembling from the adrenaline, stood tall. "The only mistake made here tonight," he shot back, his voice cracking with exhaustion, "was yours." The shorter man was pleading for his life now, but the taller one refused to surrender. He backed away slowly, his venomous gaze still locked on Silas. "It's done," Silas said, his voice calm and direct. "Don't throw the rest of your life away over one last bad choice." But desperation had made him reckless. The man suddenly lunged forward, ignoring the officer with the gun, and drove his fist hard into Silas's shoulder. The impact sent Silas staggering back into the metal trash bin with a loud crash that echoed down the block. "Stop!" Kendra screamed, her finger tightening on the trigger. Silas groaned, a wave of fire spreading through his ribs, but he pushed himself upright, his eyes finding his attacker again. He refused to show weakness. "Is that all you got?" he spat, the defiant words landing like a slap. The man faltered, stunned by Silas's unbreakable spirit. At that exact moment, 2 squad cars screeched to a halt, boxing them in. Doors flew open and officers swarmed the scene, weapons drawn, shouting overlapping commands. The fight drained out of the man instantly, replaced by the sheer animal panic of being caught. With a final agonized roar of frustration, he dropped to the ground and surrendered. It was finally over. Once the suspects were cuffed and secured, Kendra lowered her weapon, her arms shaking. She rushed to Silas's side. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes scanning him for injury. He gave a pained nod. "I've been hit a lot worse," he muttered, leaning heavily against the bin. She looked at him, really looked at him, with a profound sense of awe and gratitude that left her speechless. "You didn't have to do any of that," she finally managed to say. Silas shook his head, a weary strength in his eyes. "If I hadn't," he said, his voice raw, "there's no telling what would have happened to you." As the suspects were loaded into separate cars, their muffled shouts of rage swallowed by the slamming doors, a fellow officer approached Kendra, his notepad out. "You want us to process this guy as a material witness?" he asked, glancing at Silas with a skeptical, dismissive look. Kendra looked at her colleague, then back at the quiet, unassuming man who had stood between her and a knife. "He is more than a witness," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that made the other officer raise his eyebrows. "He's the reason I'm still standing here right now." When the chaos subsided, and they were alone in the flashing lights, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why, Silas? Why would you risk your life for a stranger?" He looked away, a flicker of old pain in his eyes. "Because I'm tired of being invisible," he said, his voice so quiet she had to lean in. "People walk past me every single day like I'm a ghost. Tonight, I guess I just wanted to feel like I mattered, even if it was only for 5 minutes. His words hit her harder than any punch. You mattered more than 5 minutes, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You changed the entire outcome of my life tonight. He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. Don't start calling me a hero. I still have to figure out where I'm sleeping tonight. In that moment, she didn't see a homeless man. She saw a guardian. She saw a man with more courage in his little finger than most people have in their whole bodies. Her training told her to finish her report and go home. But she couldn't. She walked back to him. Tonight you taught me a lesson, she said. You reminded me that the people we write off are often the ones who see the most. He told her a little about his life then, about a good job in construction, a bad back injury, and the slow, painful spiral that had landed him on this cold patch of concrete. He asked for no pity. He simply told his truth. Heroes get medals, he said with a wry grin. I get soup from the shelter, if there's any left. Maybe being a hero isn't about getting a medal, Kendra countered softly. Maybe it's about showing up when everyone else has already counted you out. She pulled a small card from her jacket pocket. It had her name and her personal cell number on it. If you are ever in trouble, or if you just need someone to listen, you call this number. Promise me. He stared at the card for a long moment, then slowly he took it. As she finally drove away, leaving him standing under the streetlight, she knew she would carry the lessons of this night with her for the rest of her life. Silas Washington had shown her that the biggest heroes are rarely the ones we expect. And he proved that being seen isn't about someone looking at you. It's about someone finally, truly, recognizing your worth. And if this story reminds you that courage can come from the most unexpected places, then don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard.